Don't you find it ironic that in the United States, the land of the free, we incarcerate more people per capita than any nation on earth? Well, today I'm going to be going to UC Berkeley. It's like the 8th or the 9th time that I've been there to be able to speak to a group of undergraduate students about the nation's prison system, about really what we can do to improve it. My name is Michael Santos, and I'm the founder of prisonprofessors.org. It's a nonprofit that we created with some very clear goals in mind. We really want to change the way we measure justice in America rather than just having calendar pages turn. We want to have more people emerge from prison with their dignity intact as law-abiding, contributing citizens. And in order to do that, we really have to rethink how the system is organized. And in order to share my perspectives with you, I think it's important for me to kind of earn your trust because you don't know who I am. So let me take you through the backstory, and you can read more about it if you have any interest by visiting prisonprofessors.org, where I really document that entire story. But here's the abbreviated version. You see, in August of 1987, when I was 23, I had to pay a price for the bad decisions I started to make when I was 20. When I was 20, I saw the movie Scarface and led me down a path of trying to shield myself from the bad decisions that I was making. I put a group of people together to traffic in cocaine. And that group, by putting that group together, I thought that I was avoiding the possibility of going into the criminal justice system. But what I was really doing was making myself more vulnerable to a more serious offense. And on August the 11th, 1987, I came into the system. I went through a criminal trial. I didn't understand anything about the criminal justice system, and so I continued to make a series of bad decisions because I was definitely guilty. But I hired an attorney who told me what I wanted to hear rather than what I really needed it to hear. What I needed to hear is that I'd made some really bad decisions, and the time was now to accept responsibility and start working on a path that would lead me to a better outcome. Unfortunately, I clung to this belief that they can't prove what I had done and proceeded to plead not guilty. And then I went to trial. And during the trial, I took the witness stand and I perjured myself on the stand. And as a result of those decisions, I made things much harder for myself. See, a jury convicted me. And when the jury convicted me, I'd already been incarcerated for about a year. And I'd spent that time in solitary confinement, so I didn't really understand what was going forward. But with a guilty verdict, I had to rethink all of the choices that I had made. And there had been some really bad choices. I was definitely guilty of trafficking in cocaine. I was definitely guilty of co-opting other people to work with me. But I didn't know how to accept responsibility and move forward until a jury convicted me. And that was really proved to be the turning point in my life. So I went back to the solitary cell, and I was very fortunate that an officer started to bring me some books that he thought would be helpful to me. And one of the first books that he brought me was this story about Frederick Douglass. I didn't know who Frederick Douglass was at that time. But I got moved by the story. See, Frederick Douglass was born during the era of slavery. And during that's all he knew since he was born in that era. The first 20 years of his life, he had to live in that system where he was enslaved. But when he was 20, he escaped. And when he escaped, he didn't go on to live his own life in liberty and just think about himself. He thought about all the people he left behind and what could he do to make a change. And I remember that really inspired me because he went on to become one of the world's most influential abolitionists. And of course, at that time in my life, I didn't know what an abolitionist was. But he was trying to change the way people looked at the institution of slavery. In order to do that, he had to take a very methodical approach. He had to work to educate himself because he'd never gone to school, so he had to learn how to read, how to write, how to communicate better. And then he had to spread a message of his own personal story, and through that effort, he started to change minds. And he was never a political official, he was never represented government, but he had a lot of influence in telling his story. And I remember that book giving me hope that maybe that's something I can do when I'm in prison, because I knew I was going to serve a very long term in prison. And fortunately, the officer who had brought me the book, the biography of Frederick Douglass, started bringing me other books. And so I learned about Socrates and Marcus Aurelius and Viktor Frankl and Nelson Mandela and all of these other people who had gone through challenges, but instead of living with anger or animosity or bitterness over what was happening to them, they thought about what could they do in that circumstance to make a better life. And that was really inspiring for me. And so I was lying in that solitary cell back in the mid-1980s, and you could feel the walls and the ceiling kind of obliterating your hope and extinguishing hope and making you feel as if this is what you're going to be until you can find hope. And that's really what I found in reading those books, is that I should stop thinking about the situation I'm in right now and start thinking about what can I do with the situation that I am in. In what ways can I emulate somebody like Frederick Douglass, who taught himself to read and to write and to communicate? In what ways could I emulate Socrates, who taught me how to think differently and to ask better questions? And those questions really were about people like you, law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. What could I do to connect with people like you? What would you expect from somebody who'd made really bad decisions and was sitting inside of a prison cell? Is there anything that this person could do that might prove worthy of your attention? And by asking and meditating on those questions, I came up with this three-pronged plan. And that three-pronged plan really was number one. I think that if I'm going to ask you to believe in me, what do you want me to do? Well, you would want me to educate myself, because if I focus on getting an education, it might show I don't want to be a criminal. Two, you might want me to contribute to society in meaningful, measurable ways. And if I can do that, you might believe that there is some hope for me to be a good citizen. And three, you might want me to build a support system. If I could build a support system of people who would believe in me, it might make it easier for you to believe in me. And once I had that vision, I restored hope and I started to build confidence. And that really helped me once I got to the prison system. That's where I'll kind of transition in here now, is going through the prison journey. So after I got sentenced, the judge sentenced me to 45 years. And I didn't know what that meant at that time in my life, because I didn't understand this concept of good time, which means that if you don't get in disciplinary infractions, you can earn some extra credit. And later I learned that if I didn't get in trouble in prison, I could finish the term in 26 years instead of 45 years. So by the time I got to the penitentiary, I already had a lot to be grateful for. Because, I found out I'm not going to be here for 45 years. As long as I do well with my life, I can get out in 26 years. But of course, as a 23-year-old, it's hard to contemplate what does 26 years in prison mean. I mean, I'm filming this video in 2025, and just kind of fast forward 26 years, you're looking at 2000. Let's see, 25, 35, 45, 50, 2051, and say, how are you going to stay motivated until 2051? Well, what motivated me was to really focus on what could I do in the first 10 years, because I don't know how to process 26 years. I haven't even been alive that long. But in 10 years, I believed I could execute that plan of working to educate myself, working to contribute to society, working to build a support system. And if I focused on that exclusively, more opportunities would open. And that's a message that I think resonates here in the United States of America. So regardless of what situation we're in, we can always work to build something better. And to the extent that we start building a plan, we can then put priorities in place. And once we have those priorities, we can start building a series of tools, tactics, and resources that will help us overcome the adversity through which we're living. And through that process, we start building confidence and we start believing in ourselves. And that was the path that got me through that first decade, when I started writing to universities and trying to get an education, telling them I had been a terrible student in high school, but now I want to be better. And if I could get into school, I will be able to emerge more successfully, more as a contributing citizen. And it takes a lot of work, because there aren't a lot of people that believe that people in prison can become good citizens. But I believed because I had read about Frederick Douglass, because I'd read about Socrates, because I'd read about Viktor Frankl or Nelson Mandela, people who had to find a way to create meaning in their lives. And because I'd spent that first year in solitary confinement, I could really appreciate being in the liberty of a high security penitentiary, even though it was one of the most violent prisons in the nation. And I couldn't see beyond the horizon because there was a 40-foot wall surrounding me. I could look up and I could see the sky, and I could see hope in the sky, and I could breathe fresh air. And in all of that, you could find a way to be grateful for things that I think people out here in society take for granted. But that prison journey is really what inspired me to really want to change the system, just like Frederick Douglass wanted to change the system of institutional slavery. I want to change a system that perpetuates intergenerational cycles of failure. And when I go into universities, I come in always asking for help. I want people in a university to believe they can be part of something bigger than themselves. They can be part of something that changes the system. But changing the system isn't easy. Right? It requires a massive amount of work because people in society become complacent. We start believing that this is the only way to respond to somebody who's broken the law is by prosecuting them, putting them in prison, obliterating their hope, making it difficult for their families and their children. And that's a bad path. You know, we incarcerate more people than any other nation, as I said at the start of this path, and we've got to do something different. Well, to do something different, you've got to have a plan. You got to have that same plan that it takes to change a personal life. If you can change your personal life, you can help other people believe that they can change their life. And when you can change their life, you can start thinking about what is the best possible outcome that can come out of our nation's prison system. If you start asking that question, you will come up with a different solution than locking people in cages and prosecuting people. In fact, in the United States, we frequently will point accusatory fingers at other nations and say how they violate human rights. But if I'm to ask anybody in an audience, what is a human right? What do you consider a basic human right? I think that an answer that I would receive, and you could tell me if you see things differently, but basic human rights are the freedom of speech. Right? It is freedom to communicate. It is freedom to reach a higher potential and develop skills and prepare yourself for success. But in the United States, we violate human rights for millions of people because we lock them in prisons and we stop them from being able to learn how to function in a society that is changing faster than it's ever changed before because of artificial intelligence and cryptocurrencies and biotech and so many other ways that the world is changing. But people in prison, they're like stuck. They're stuck in this environment where they don't have access to the internet. They can't communicate even with their family. They can't receive visits. They can't go to school. They've got so many obstructions that it's very difficult. And so my message is to try and change that. And when I go to universities, that's what I try and get students to do. I try to get the very least thing that you could do is just follow prison professors on social media and share the work that we are doing with as many people as possible. Because if we share that work, we start to ask better questions and people can challenge me. And I will respond to anybody that I get the answer to, that I get a question from. I try to respond and I try to show them why this system of working toward earning freedom is significantly better than locking people in cages. But getting that message out requires a massive amount of heavy lifting and resources, and that's why one of the reasons I go to universities and ask them to help. And later today, I'm filming this in late January 2025, I will be going to UC Berkeley and asking students in Wheeler Hall to get involved with our nonprofit, prisonprofessors.org, which anybody can see. If you go, wherever you're seeing social media, if you just go to @prisonprofessors, it will take you to our website and you will see a little call for interns where people can get involved. And we really don't need that much work. We just need people to spread the message of what's better, of what can work better than locking people in cages, as I learned when I was in prison. Now, of course, that advocacy effort required me to, first of all, develop those credentials as I wrote about, as I said at the beginning, the three-pronged plan. I'd have to earn an undergraduate degree is what I did during the first 10 years of my sentence. I earned a master's degree in prison. I became a published author. That was the pathway that I would describe I was contributing to society. And because of all of that work, I built a strong support system and a strong network. And it's one of the reasons that I got to launch my career in advocacy, because I started to build these coalitions around me of, tens of people, then hundreds of people, then thousands of people, then tens of thousands of people. Even while I was in prison, I would bring them into my life and they would become, part of my coalition, so to speak. And that coalition would work to try and get me freedom. But there was, it was a different era. I was in prison from 1987 until I finished my sentence in 2013. And during that era, we were not focusing on preparing people for success upon release. We were focusing on locking more people in prisons. So in order to change that, I wrote extensively, not only wrote books that were used in universities, but also wrote articles and built this following. I mean, the internet had started, so I was able to write by hand and send it home. And then, I got married while I was in prison, and my wife became my liaison to the world and started building my website and publishing the articles that I was writing. And that led more and more people to learn about my work. And when I finally transitioned from a federal prison to a halfway house in the Tenderloin of San Francisco, I got a call from an editor at the San Francisco Chronicle, and he said, "Hey, you've been in prison for a quarter century, and you're coming back to society. We'd really love to profile your story and talk about what it's like to reenter society after so much time." And I was more than willing to participate in that experiment because I would get to share more about what I saw, what could we do differently in the system. And that led to a front page article that came out on Thanksgiving weekend in November of 2012. And it led to me getting a phone call from Professor Hallen Ross here at UC Berkeley, which is where I'm here in the Bay Area right now. I'm in Mill Valley, but later this afternoon I'll be traveling to Berkeley and making this presentation. But Professor Ross reached out and said, "Hey, we've got several hundred undergrads that would love to hear you tell your story and present." And that was the first of many visits that I made to UC Berkeley, where I got to make this call of what could we do differently. And you learn and evolve. I mean, when I got out of prison, there was a lot I had to learn. I went to prison before the internet, before there was a cell phone, before there was email. So I had to learn how to build a business. But now it's 2025. I've built businesses. I'm more successful. And I get to devote the rest of my life to advocacy, to trying to show people a better path than measuring justice by the turning of calendar pages. In fact, I wrote one of the books that I use to promote my work is called Earning Freedom, Conquering a 45-Year Prison Sentence. And in that book, it tells this entire story. It's a long book. It's like 550 pages, but it tells the story from the day of my arrest until the day I concluded my sentence. And it shows how the early preparations in prison led to me getting an education, led to mentors coming into my life, led to me getting married in prison, opened opportunities for me to come home and build a career. And it positioned me to build businesses once I've come home. I was a professor here in San Francisco when I first got out, and I would start advocating for change. And it's really that kind of advocacy led to me working with the Rabina Institute and Stanford University and other organizations where I published an article in the UC Hastings Law Review called Incentivizing Excellence, where I spoke about this whole concept that would say, instead of locking people in cages when they break the law, we should assess their potential to redeem themselves. And we should incentivize them to work toward making amends and atoning and repaying their debt to society. But once they are no longer needed to be incarcerated, we should encourage them to go on and live to their highest potential. And that would benefit society, in my view. When you focus on extinguishing hope, you get the result that we have right now. which is a nation that incarcerates far too many people, an ecosystem that costs $100 billion a year plus, not counting the costs of other social injustices that follow as ancillary consequences to our nation's criminal justice system. But I then started building these courses called, that are related to what I taught in Earning Freedom. One of them is Preparing for Success After Prison. One of them is Triumph, Building Bridges for Success After Prison. And we spread those through our relationships with prison systems and also with other nonprofits like the Adovo Foundation. And we reach more than 1 million people in prison. That's really what my job is, I would say, or my career now is becoming an ambassador for this message of hope that I learned from leaders like Frederick Douglass or Socrates or Viktor Frankl or Nelson Mandela or Marcus Aurelius or so many other people who had a huge influence on my journey, not only through prison, my ability to find the love of my life while I was in prison and get married, my ability to build a career and financial success, and then now say it's all about making an impact. Now it's all about influencing more people. And so when I go into prisons, I try and co-opt the prisons into the people in prison to follow this same path. But sometimes they need a little bit more than just a push. Sometimes they need a little bit more than the books that I write or the courses that I deliver. They also need a mechanism through which they can reach out and connect with other people just as I did. And that I got inspired by the CEO of Airbnb, Brian Chesky, who wrote, who responded to a question about the hardest thing he had to do when building his business was when he had to lay people off during COVID. He said he really wanted to help them recalibrate, and so he built Airbnb.com/talent to profile all of their credentials and the value that they brought. And I said, that's something that I can do through our nonprofit. So we built Prison Professors Talent, where anybody in prison can write to us, and we'll have a team that receives those letters and builds a profile for them, showing all of the ways that they are working to reconcile with society and make amends. And that is kind of a pathway that we are using to collect data that will show it's far better to incentivize a pursuit of excellence than to obliterate hope. That doesn't work anywhere. That's not even part of America, right? The harder you work in America, the higher you can become. And we want people in prison to understand, regardless of what challenges you're facing right now, what bad decisions you've made in the past, it's never too early and it's never too late to start building a better life. And the more we invest in people, the better and stronger our society becomes. And this is not only my life that lives that way. I mean, I've profiled other people who follow this same path. If you visit our website, you'll read about Hallen Flowers, an amazing story of a young guy that was facing multiple life sentences and went into high security penitentiaries, serving life sentences, but he never gave up. He invested in himself, and because of that, he was able to persuade a judge to give him another shot. And he got released from prison, and he is now one of the world's most influential ambassadors of hope. He's an artist. He is a person that has achieved great fame, and you can look him up yourself. Hallen Flowers. Don't only look at prison professors as a beacon of hope. Look at other people. In fact, now that I'm in the Bay Area, I like to talk about Ross Ulbricht, who I finished my sentence in August of 2013, and just a couple of months later, in October of 2013, authorities arrested Ross Ulbricht. He was the founder of Silk Road, a website that he has spoken about his thoughts of in building that site and what his hopes were, and he has expressed regret for building a platform that contributed to the spread of drugs, but he wasn't violent. And he didn't really even understand the implications of every decision, because people, when you're 20 years old, you don't really have the wisdom that you have when you're 40 or 50 or 30. You know, you're still evolving, and despite, his youth and despite him having no history of violence, he went through trial, and prosecutors made their case not for justice, but rather for vengeance, and painted him as being a monster. And a federal judge sentenced him to 2 life sentences plus 40 years because a jury had convicted him of a continuing criminal enterprise, which was the same statute that a jury convicted me of. So I could identify with that, with Ross's plight, although he was going in right when I had come out. And I remember his mother and his fiance at the time had written and asked if I would support, and I was very proud to support Ross Ulbricht because I knew it was wrong to impose life sentences on people. We should do instead is recognize people make decisions. Sometimes they're bad decisions, but people can always work to become better. And as a society, it's in our interest to make things better. And when I'm going to be at Berkeley today, I'm going to be asking those students to help me spread this message, both on social media. In fact, I'm going to ask you, if you're watching this, visit us at Instagram or YouTube or any of the places where we publish. Our team publishes a lot of these videos. And just share the message. Share the message of hope. Help people believe that they can reach their highest potential and not serve justice by locking them in a cage, obliterating hope, creating intergenerational cycles of failure, ancillary consequences that follow. But let's just show a better way. And I hope that people in Berkeley will support us. I hope that you will support us. Visit us at prisonprofessors.org, where I always make 3 promises. 1, I'll never lie to you. 2, I'll never ask anyone to do anything that I didn't do. And 3, I'll never ask anybody to pay me a penny. My name is Michael Santos. I am the founder of Prison Professors, and I believe in you.